Greetings, students. This is week 7, and we're going to be talking about collection and access as they relate to school library leadership. Some of the themes that we'll be thinking about in the lecture as well as in our readings and explorations this week are on this word cloud. And some resources I wanted to recommend you'll find on the New York City School Library System LibGuide, and I am beefing up our own Library Studies LibGuide, and you'll get some links to that. Relating to collection, when folks think of the library, I don't know that this has evolved very much. They think of a collection in terms of the books and the physical resources our library owns. In terms of your library, your program is way bigger than that, and your collection is way bigger than people likely imagine it is. A collection is a balanced and carefully selected, systematically organized, varied animal based on print and digital and audio and all sorts of different formats. It connects to meeting student needs in all subject areas as well as their life-wide interests. And your collection and your collection development needs to be centered on the notion that it is growing, evolving, continually monitored for currency, for relevancy, for need. And so those are a couple of things to think about. But beyond that, you want to really understand that all of your decisions regarding collection are grounded in the principles of equity and access, in protecting students, in fact, all your users' rights to information. As you work on collection development, you're thinking about analyzing your community's needs, and we're doing that in your environmental scan as well as your strategic plan. We're also analyzing our existing resources. We're considering policies and procedures, those that exist and those that need to be created or updated. We're considering our plan if we have one in existence, or we're considering the growth of one. We're considering acquisitions and processing. Vendors and aggregators. Aggregators are those entities that allow us to purchase from a group of publishers or vendors. We're thinking about how we're going to make things available through the way we catalog them. In school libraries, a lot of the cataloging is not original. You'll discover that. And how we make them available and accessible. We're also thinking about the way we circulate our materials. We're also thinking about how we maintain or repair them. And then that funny word, deselection, which is also referred to as weeding. We'll cover some of these in this lecture, and some of them we'll cover in our readings and in our playlist. Even with, or especially with, limited funds, you need to plan to grow your collection. You need to figure out what needs you're going to meet. And so this community scan that you're doing and the personas that you develop and focus on and your goal writing offer practice in your collection development. I'd love to see everybody come up with a collection goal supported by objectives and focused on personas. You can't buy everything that you need every year. You're growing a collection, and you need to have some focus. You need to understand direction. You'll find a number of excellent blog posts of librarians in practice talking about collection development and the need for the plan in the Knowledge Quest blogs under the topic collection development. Sedley Abercrombie in this one offers some real important rationale, so take a good look at some of those. These days, I think it's very important to recognize that collection is not just what we purchase. In a world of digital resources, it's also what we point to and make discoverable. And that discoverability can be in our OPACs, in our LibGuides, in our websites. It's where the user is going to discover them. And this is especially important because our users are not always with us. We are facing library users who no longer need to come to the library to use our collections. We have to expect 24/7, wherever, whenever access. As I looked at my LibGuide use when I was at the high school, I realized that although my students were in school for maybe 6 to 8 hours, um, the use that was the largest in my LibGuides happened in the weekends and the evenings. And so that accessibility of both purchased and free resources has to be something that you consider. When we think about resources, this photograph, you can see some old equipment here, was taken several years ago, but this is one of my high school library assistants who was just cleaning out the closet for me. And we were thinking about all of the resources that we circulated and how we had to create catalog entries for things like green screens and audio recorders and cameras and headphones and other types of resources. So all of this becomes part of your catalog or your collection. And you're going to have to make some decisions because you can make the same purchase. So, for instance, if it's a reference book, which format are you going to buy it in? Are you going to buy both a print copy and an ebook? Which way do your students or your teachers or your users prefer it? From which vendors are you going to make those purchases? Will you make that purchase in multiple formats to meet different types of needs? Recognizing that your print encyclopedias or reference tools might not be as scalable or available by a number of multiple users as your physical copies, although some students might like to sit on the floor and browse through Annals of America. So these decisions are tough to make, and sometimes you can make some bargain deals with vendors who are eager to sell in multiple formats that may not be practical for everyone. You really are going to have to make some cost-effective decisions that make sense for your community. And you want to do things like avoiding duplication. What is already available, for instance, from the state? So that overlap is something that you're really going to consider. Which journals are covered by EBSCO, ProQuest, Gale, and are you duplicating purchasing efforts? So you really want to look at those things and make some thoughtful decisions. In terms of some of the physical resources, barring the things that we're calling digital rights management, which you really want to avoid as you make digital purchases, you want to get the most open, accessible, freest kind of loan regulations that you can. Well, no regulations is better. You want to make decisions. What are your loan periods going to be? These are things you're going to enter in your OPAC at the beginning of the school year or at the beginning of a few school years. Are you going to charge overdues and fines to get your materials back? Some people do, some people don't. Are you going to have an unlimited number of items borrowed? Some people scale this up starting with kindergarten through 6th grade and make different decisions for grade levels. Are you going to set up reserves or waiting lists, or are you just going to purchase the more heavily demanded items? What procedures and approaches are you going to have? Are you going to aggressively get books back, or are you going to do some incentivizing? There's so many decisions that are personally made at the building level. And much of what you're going to create, recognize that your catalog is going to do the work for you after you make the decisions. Access is a problem. When you have digital materials, will the students that you're purchasing for and are going to be using remote, will they have the Wi-Fi? Will they have the devices on which to use? A while back, we did a survey of parents, and while there were computers available at home, mom and dad were often using the computers for work or for their own academic work. And so even if there are computers at home, how much access do your kiddos have? And are you in the midst of, or do you have your own one-to-one program? Do your students have access to materials before and after school? Do they have easy access to the public library? All of these are going to play a role in your collection development as you make digital decisions. And so we're going to make decisions about all sorts of stuff that we put in our collections. Are we going to include student work, for instance? What about audiobooks, ebooks? Are we going to have access to social media, presentations, YouTube video, and of course OER? These are some OER portals that are worth mining, and they're coming with metadata, and so these can be put in our collections. But we can also make them searchable through, for instance, Google custom search engines and curations. So how we're going to include them in our catalogs, how we're going to collect these things, are decisions that are made on a personal or individual or building level. How are we going to make the decisions of what goes on our students' devices? How are we going to select apps or help our students select apps? Because a lot of the access that's going on to our collections are digital and mobile. And so tools like Mac and VIA are really going to be important. That's a free tool that'll make a lot of your collection accessible. Many times you'll find that individual databases or apps are available, but how are your students going to search across your collection? We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about discovery. Ebooks are a problem. Somebody once referred to them as welcome to crazy land or crazy town because often they live in their own silos. I had to make a decision when I was collecting ebooks. I was collecting them individually, buying them through database through aggregators, and then I made a decision to go with the EBSCO ebook collections for the EBSCO Academic. What that gave me was 100,000 ebooks in a collection, which offered my students the most amazing long tail access. I did not select the 100,000 ebooks. I lost out on my personal selection of the books. However, those books had no DRM rights attached to them that could be used by multiple users. And while I didn't build the collection myself, the access was a pretty compelling argument and a pretty scalable argument for use, especially for our senior capstone projects. You will make these decisions independently, but you have to also make them practically and in a cost-efficient way. So lots of things to think about. Another thing to think about is audio. There are a variety of different platforms you can use. I did a blog post recently with the collaboration of a friend, Marianne Shore, who is a real audiobook advocate who really sees their value in having readers stretch their ability to read in above grade level and also to engage new readers in story. So Tales to Go is one option, but there are multiple other platforms. So think about audiobooks as you think about collection. And as we think about collection, we're not thinking about collection in a vacuum. Student input is critical. Do you know what your readers want to read? And that we're going to talk more about that in our plan. And faculty input is critical as well, knowing your community. I am a big fan of Andy Plemons' work, and at Barrow Media Center, each year he devotes a portion of his annual budget to his students and has them do the collection development. So they have to talk to vendors, research what the students want to read, make tough budgeting decisions, and then in the end, they get to open the boxes that come from the vendors and display the books and market them. It's a great learning activity, and you can read his blog posts year after year about this budget project. There are others, and this is about a junior library council with Kelly Hinkey, I think, writing for the Knowledge Quest blog about having students do some more book selection. So Andy is not alone. And then we're thinking about how to make the books that we order more accessible and more interesting and more engaging. And so a number of librarians, including Tiffany Whitehead, have been talking about genreification, ditching Dewey to either completely or to a smaller extent to genreify our collections and include fiction and nonfiction together in some way, in some cases, and perhaps put all the sports books together, all the horror books together, all the mysteries together, away from in the fiction a strict alphabetical arrangement by author name, and perhaps including sports biography with sports fiction. These are things you're going to need to decide upon. Many librarians have discovered by genreification that they've increased circulation and student interest, and they see the collection just moving more. We're also thinking as we build collection in terms of the right to read, the Library Bill of Rights, intellectual freedom, and there are many documents and policy statements by ALA and AASL that are relevant to us in terms of collection. The intellectual freedom statements are absolutely worth reading, and we'll talk more about selection policy later in this talk, but be aware that support is out there for you when you're making tough decisions and brave decisions. You can read all about banned and challenged books, and in September each year, we celebrate, that's an interesting word, Banned Book Week, and there's lists every year of the top most challenged books, and there's definitely support. There's also Banned Websites Awareness Day, which takes place during Banned Books Awareness Day to make people aware of the issues we face with filtering in schools and the blocking of websites and social networking tools in schools. Just another statement on that. I just think it's important for us to consider who makes the decisions about whether a website or an app or a digital resource is allowed or banned in schools. Is it educators, or could it be a network administrator who may be wonderfully intentioned but removed from the educational program? And what kind of dialogue do you have with those people in the schools to make resources that you know are going to be important for learning available in your school? You are likely to be the only person to be waving the intellectual freedom banner. You are likely to be the only person who really feels as strongly about this as you should as a librarian. And so if you're not going to stand up for what you believe here, don't expect the rest of the school community to. This is your job. Just recently, AASL, a committee built of the emerging leaders, created Defending the Intellectual Freedom, the LGBTQ plus materials in school libraries. This is a wonderful kit that's built on our shared foundations and has activities, questions that help you examine your practice and your own biases. And this stuff is wonderful to work on with other faculty members, with librarians in your district, and also to use in case a book is challenged or any resource is challenged that relates to LGBTQ issues in your school. In fact, one of the things they note is on the banned books list, you'll often find that a number of those books are banned because they deal with LGBT issues or characters. John Green did a wonderful little video, which will run, on our need for diverse books, and we need to really think about that.
Diverse books. I think we need diverse books because we need to reflect the reality of our communities, and that reality is a very diverse one. But also, while it's important to see yourself in stories, and I think lots of people don't see themselves in enough stories, it's also really important to see the other. Like, one of the magical things about reading to me is that it helps me to imagine the life outside of myself, right? Like, it helps me to imagine other people complexly. And when you don't see the lives of others in stories, it's difficult to imagine them complexly. And I think that contributes to the essentializing of the other. So I really think it's vital that we have diversity in our literature. I first heard about the We Need Diverse Books campaign on Tumblr, which is where I find out about a lot of cool stuff. And I was very excited about it because we have this huge problem in children's and young adult literature of not having enough diverse books, but also not getting those books to enough of an audience. Like, when we have great writers of color, we have great writers who are writing about the experience of disability or the experience of being an LGBT person, we don't have enough like marketing push to get those books to the audience they deserve. So that's one of the most exciting things about the We Need Diverse Books campaign to me.
It's also important that we understand
We
the
need
need for
diverse books because
windows, mirrors, and sliding
we
doors.
need books in which children can find themselves, see reflections of themselves. I wrote a piece, maybe 1990 it was published, which I called Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors. And I think that's really why children need to see themselves reflected, but books can also be windows, and so you can look through and see other worlds and see how they match up or don't match up to your own. But the sliding glass door allows you to enter that world as well, and so that's the reason that the diversity needs to go both ways. I mean, it's not just children who have been underrepresented and marginalized who need these books. It's also the children who always find their mirrors in the books and therefore get an exaggerated sense of their own self-worth and a false sense of what the world is like, because it's becoming more and more colorful and diverse as time goes on. So I think that's why.
Before we leave the topic of intellectual freedom and access, there are a number of ALA and AASL position papers or statements on your playlist this week. I want to point to this one, which comes up in our discussions quite frequently historically, the position statement on labeling books with reading labels. And I'm going to read just a paragraph or two from this. One of the realities school librarians face in their jobs is the pressure by administrators and classroom teachers to label and arrange library collections according to reading levels. Students' browsing behaviors can be profoundly altered with the addition of the external reading levels, with reading level labels often closely tied to reward points through reading, commercial reading packages and incentive systems. Student browsing becomes mainly a search for books that must be read and tests completed for individual or classroom point goals and or grades. School library collections are not merely extensions of classroom book collections or classroom teaching methods, but rather places where children can explore interests safely and without restriction. A minor's right to access resources freely and without restriction has long been and continues to be the position of the American Library Association and the American Association of School Librarians. Labeling and shelving in a book with an assigned grade level on its spine allows other students to observe the reading level of peers, thus threatening the confidentiality of student reading levels. Only a student, the child's parent or guardian, the teacher, and the school librarian, as appropriate, should have the knowledge of a student's reading capacity. I really hope that you take this position statement to heart and avoid labeling your collections by reading level. Shifting gears a little bit, of course, one of the more expensive collection decisions you're going to make is which database to purchase. Here are some of the major brands. Now, each one of these brands these are not databases themselves, but each one of these brands, they're aggregators, and they themselves have a variety of different databases. Some of them are available through your state purchase or a major library district purchase. Sometimes there are consortia that purchase databases for individual libraries, and you'll have to make decisions on your own about local needs. So these are expensive purchases, and you need to take them very seriously, of course, and examine for overlap, but also recognize that in the old days, we might spend a couple of $1,000s on a print encyclopedia usable by one student, one volume, one student at a time. These are scaled 24/7 again across an entire school population, sometimes across a whole district. And so these are very. And when you need to make the case for databases, this poster that I worked on with Dr. Brenda Boyer, who some of you may have had for learning theory, may help you make the case. And it's also a good poster, I think, to go over with students and faculty members. These are among the reasons are these are the databases you're going to get to know their older brothers and sisters when you hit the university. You can use them to actually cite your sources. They have exportable citations. You can easily filter out the noise. You can filter for the scholarly. You can better control your results. There are just so many reasons that that you might want to use a database over a general search engine. And if you needed to make the case for teachers, these are a number of reasons that why teachers should be looking at databases. And there are many, many features that the educational databases build in, including lesson plans and Lexile scores, that teachers would love once they finally discover them. I mentioned the university, the number of databases, Dr. Boyer calculated this, that students are going to face, as you probably already know as master's students, about 19-to-1 compared to the number of databases that are usually available at the high school. In our case, we had a large array of databases, and I was able to negotiate some very good deals on. So just think about that your students are going to face them, and they are really good. If you get a chance, my students did love databases at the high school, and this little video is kind of funny, where one of my students imagined he was Mr. Database Man making the case for databases all over the school. As I mentioned, you'll likely have a limited budget, but you'll be able to discover, not everybody here is in New Jersey, the various different databases beyond Jersey Clicks that are offered around the country, free to taxpayers. And I created this little ThingLink poster that linked to the database purchases across the states. If I made a mistake in case of your state, please help me update that poster. This is my own area in Pennsylvania. This is our Access Pennsylvania Power Library. And you'll see that this will have different databases from the choices made for the New Jersey or perhaps your other state. And that is because we have different committees that are making those decisions. Some are actually more focused on K-12 and some are more focused on public libraries. And your voice may be really important. One feature that I mentioned in the search course is that among the things that I love about the Jersey Clicks links, especially the EBSCOhost links, is that the databases have geolocation. So once you have the geolocation link on your website, students will not need a password to access those databases when they're not in school and they're not And of course, databases are not just for big kids. There are a number of emerging, highly graphical interfaces for younger readers that are really intuitive, and you can mouse over an icon and hear what it represents. It's kind of exciting. So there are the Explorer products that are EBSCO. We have several SIRS products, including SIRS Discover. Capstone works generally for primary age children. And please take the time this week, if not on an ongoing basis this semester, to examine our database trials as well as the databases that are provided for you by your state. There are some features in databases that are kind of hidden or are not appreciated as much as they should be. In the case of ProQuest Historical Newspapers Graphical Edition, there's a wonderful timeline. There is an obituary search, the date of birth search, and there's great little essays that create context around a subject. You'll find in the ABC Clio products and many others fabulous primary sources that can be used for AP US history and across the board for analysis. You'll also find that there are suggested activities and tools. This one has to do with debate. You'll find that some of them are updated with news feeds, usually on the right panel. And there's often an easy button, not necessarily needed in JSTOR for scholarly articles, academic articles, or peer-reviewed articles, but in many of the other databases that are aimed at secondary students, you'll see a button for that so that students can get used to using academic publishing. The big thing with databases is making sure the students discover them. And how do they find them? You'd have to go into them in most library collections to actually use them. How do you get your return on investment if students aren't discovering them, or if they're not used by as many students as possible who really need them? Our catalogs, our OPACs, our websites, there's so many different entry points to our collection, and that often creates silos. And so the students who need the stuff that they need can't discover it because they're staying in one silo. Could be your OPAC, it could be your LibGuides. And we talked about this if you were in 530 with me. There is a thing called discovery search. People usually associate it with an academic environment, but I had it at the high school, and you'll see that discovery products like EBSCO's EDS are filtering down through K-12. It creates a Google-like one-box search approach across your entire digital collection, and it might include your OPAC's holdings as well, depending upon how you set that up. It can absolutely include every one of your databases, and it is supposed to be not biased by brand. So it's a brand agnostic in terms of the way it returns results. So you may be thinking, if you have a good budget and you're at a secondary level, look into discovery to make sure that your resources get used as much as they can. Of course, discovery works best when users know how to use the after search filters once they do their initial search. You could make important apps as part of your collection, those things that you point to, accessible through tools like QR codes, bookmarks, etc. And now we shift gears a little bit into the subject of acquisitions and weeding. Weeding and shifting, interesting way to think about things, because when you weed, you shift. But there are a number of articles all over the place that talk about what you do when you have books on your shelves that you no longer need. This is that deselection element. And there are some wonderful strategies that are out there. This is one article in American Libraries, and it also includes some horror stories about what happens when people discover you're weeding. And so weeding is a touchy subject that you probably shouldn't talk about at cocktail parties. And it has been the story of news exposés where community members have found books in dumpsters then and really not even thought about the fact that they might be old or unusable, but there's a book in a dumpster, and that creates all sorts of community outrage. So sometimes this has to do with gifts. People think they're doing you a huge favor when they clean out their basements and give you their donations. And when you open the box, you discover all sorts of terrible things. Your material selection policy, which we're going to be talking about in a bit, has to have a line or two about not necessarily keeping every box of gifts that you get. You cannot do that. You will get gifts that have nothing to do with your collection. The notorious thing is people have huge collections of National Geographic magazine, and I actually, when I came into my library, I had three issues of every issue of National Geographic going back to the early 1900s, which I eventually weeded very carefully and quietly. But community members had given me or somebody those over the years, so you don't need that space taken. Of course, not all gifts are unwelcome. One idea we'll talk a little bit more about in advocacy and budget is the notion of a birthday book club. And that's just one example. I've also had memorial book clubs where children have died and there were book programs set up in their honor. But in this case, children are welcome to have a book donated to the library in honor of their birthday, and they might get to choose the book from a list. My former student, Maureen Schlosser, took my birthday book club idea, and mine led to an Amazon wish list. Now, I had an assistant who would help me process these books. This could be a very important way to build your collection, but it also can lead to a processing nightmare, as do the acceptance of gifts. Some gifts are great, but what happens is they come unprocessed. You'll get lovely new books from Amazon or from a bookstore, and then they will lie on a book cart until somebody has enough time to process that. And processing takes a lot of time. So I wanted to show you one manual. This is the manual from Follett. It's not actually a manual. It's a way you order your books. So I would like for you to talk to your field experience librarian at some point, if you haven't yet, about this, and see how books are ordered and in what choices he or she makes when they order processed books. There are some districts that only order books processed, and one of the issues is when you're faced with some lovely gifts, can you afford the time to have them processed? And you can see all the detail that goes into the processing of a book here. But what you're doing is you're putting book covers on, you're printing and generating labels, you're generating barcodes, you're entering the books into the OPAC. A lot of that stuff can be done in advance by any, not just Follett, by any publisher. They want to sell the books, and so they offer the service, but it isn't free in most cases. Shipping and handling is often free, but processing costs money. And you can see on the bottom left some of the prices, and these are all links so you can take a look. But please see what that process looks like. It's often a surprise when you haven't checked this out in your field experience library. There are tools for collection development and analyzing your collection to help you discover what you want to weed. Among those tools is one that you'll likely be using as you create your strategic plan, and you'll find a variety of collection development and analysis tools on Follett's Title Wave. And one of them is TitleWise, which is a tool for analyzing the quality and the age and the intensity of some subject areas of your collection. I'm going to play this little video from Follett to talk about the importance of a few things, of collection development as a plan, and also using these analysis tools.
Once empty shelves.
I came in at night with my husband and we just filled garbage bags and we just got, totally weeded the whole collection.
Now filled with 10,000 new books.
Welcome to your new library! We're always told that maybe one day, money might fall from the sky and you gotta be ready.
Henrico School District in Virginia got ready with the help of Follett's TitleWise Title Map collection analysis and development tools.
Follett was our bridge to make it happen.
Look in this picture, it really shows you how empty the shelves were too.
We came up with a process. Our Follett rep was really good about helping us map it out. This is day one, and this is where we want to be in January. You have to go back a couple of years because this process wouldn't have come about if we hadn't done some groundwork. And so the neat thing about what happened here was we had collection reports done by our rep. And I had wanted to do that. I love data. I like working with data. And in a school division, data speaks. If you have information that they can back with statistics, it's much more powerful.
Follett's free tools identified the weaknesses in Henrico's libraries and built a roadmap to improve the age of the collection and increase circulation over time. Henrico used the analysis to appropriate Title I funds to libraries across the district, 66,500 books worth.
These are all the Follett boxes when the books So, like Mad, it would be, going on Tidal Wave, looking through magazines and finding, reading all the reviews. What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? Just put it on a list, put it on a list, put it on a list, and see what it comes up to be. And even though you could buy everything in the series, it's, I still have all this money. So it took a very, very long time, but it was super exciting. I mean, who doesn't like to shop?
I don't think you stop just because the money is here and the books are on the shelf. It's a continuous process, and you want to continue to keep the books and the collection where it is today. And to do that, you need to keep working.
And that's it.
This is a little snapshot of what a title-wise analysis looks like. If your librarian in your field experience doesn't have access to title-wise, you can get it and show her it. And if you need help submitting the collection to software, you can contact your Follett representative if you do have Follett or Destiny. And this link will have a video, you'll see it in the playlist as well, that will teach you how to perform a title-wise collection analysis. If you don't use Destiny or Follett, or if you can't use another tool, let me know and we'll do a manual analysis, and we'll talk about a good strategy for doing that. And in addition to that, the American Library Association has its own workbook for selection policy writing. And one of the things you're going to examine as you look at your strategic plan is, do you have a collection development policy, a material selection policy in place? This is a district level policy. If you don't, you probably want to work with the other librarians in the district to create one. And it is not that hard because you do not have to create it from scratch. There are templates out there. This workbook provides a lot of the language. It doesn't have to be original. You can say at the bottom, this was developed using the workbook from the American Library Association. But please take a look at this and try to bring this information to your district if it doesn't have one. This is a resource from Linda Bertland, who has a school library directory, who's wonderful. She's retired now, but she gathers all sorts of materials that are useful for librarians in practice. And this is a list of model material selection policies and also collection planning tools. And I'd love for you to take a good look at some of the things that your material selection policy should have a procedure to follow when a challenge is lodged. And that is a procedure that happens every single time. So you have who are you going to contact, how is it, and what's the next step, who is going to make the final decision. And that is, you'll see examples of that in most of the resources that I just shared. Another element of the material selection policy is the reconsideration of materials form. This is really critical. If somebody is serious and they want to seriously challenge any type of material in your library, they should be willing to fill out the form. Often somebody just wants to complain and they're not going to be serious enough to fill in the form. Sometimes they will. And one interesting thing about the digital kind of world that we live in is people can go through your catalog without being in your library. And so there actually are organizations that will create challenges just browsing around online catalogs. More than likely, it's going to be somebody in your community who objects to somebody under a philosophical, religious, or personal reasons. This is different from somebody not wanting a book read by somebody in an English classroom. This is serious because if a book is removed from the library, it diminishes everyone else's right to read or view or experience. So this form is critical. It distinguishes between the informal and the more formal concerns, and it actually gives you a moment to say stop. I'm going to stop and I'm going to give you the form. This is official, and you're welcome to submit this, and we'll go through the procedure. Without this in place, without the procedures in place, it is very possible that people will cave and the book will be removed from the shelf, which is not supposed to happen. That's one of the clauses in the language in these things. The book stays on the shelves until the decision is made. And so having this form is a very important part of material selection policy development process, and it is definitely, again, one you don't need to make from scratch. There are so many templates available. This is one of the school library. This is the school library template form that is available from the American Library Association. There are some trends in collection development. In this age of easy digital sharing and quick purchasing, even using tools like Amazon as a delivery vehicle, we have moved away buying everything we think we might need for just in case use to just in time use. If there is some hot topic that develops suddenly, I know I can get books much more quickly than I used to, and that brings up the other notion of getting your books pre-processed. That's one disincentive from buying them from Amazon, but you can get books far more quickly. Being able to text a friend at another library facilitates a more informal interlibrary loan than the old process. Borrowing within a school, borrowing quickly from your local public library, and just simply purchasing online makes it much easier. We have moved away from solely critic recommended titles to really kind of getting a sense of what kids and teachers need. We've moved from just collection to collection that's also incorporating digital curation, and we talked about that earlier. We are moving towards a more collaboratively or participatory driven collection development. We are purchasing in categories rather than just spending things directly from a budget. And it's not just the accountability in terms of the expertise of the library and in terms of knowing books, but it's also accountability for delivering the tools needed for successfully implementing a curriculum. So things are changing. I wanted to share even more documents that are going to be useful to you as you work on policy and some issues to consider. Do you buy, as we mentioned, do we buy books or do we rent them kind of like through a subscription? Making those decisions between print and digital, some of these we talked about. Checking what your personal bias is. Are you buying books because you are interested in them rather than because it's for your community? Are you representing a balanced point of view? We are thinking about whether we need fines or not in a library. Everybody's situation is different. We're dealing with issues relating to access in terms of who decides whether sites should be filtered, whether gaming or social networking should be allowed in our library or in our collections. How are we going to keep the confidentiality of records private? And that has something to do with student search records as well. We need to be considering what Google is collecting or COPPA as we're accessing or selecting apps as part of, let's think of apps as part of our collection. Really paying attention to students' privacy for the under 13 set when it comes to their sharing their email addresses. We're also thinking about talking with students about intellectual property issues in terms of making digital copies, and there's so many issues relating to that. Internet safety as they're engaged in websites that we are selecting. And also censorship and filtering, of course, and we talked about that before. We talked about policies and plans. You know that you're making a strategic plan, and you'll probably be developing either a formal or informal collection development plan. But as I mentioned, a material selection policy, just remember that it outlines your theoretical and philosophical vision for what you're going to do in terms of developing a collection. It is connected to your mission statement. It includes procedures based on both your mission and your vision statement. and the policy is a board-approved document. So those are real differences. And you can't just create a policy for an individual school library unless perhaps it's an independent school. You should have faculty input in your policy development, and you should have faculty input in weeding. And this collection development and weeding is connected to everybody. The 3 C's it's often described at: looking at your community, looking at your curriculum, and looking at your existing collection in the type of way that we talked about with title-wise. We have to examine who is going to use the collection, who is the audience, who currently uses it, how will you build it for all users? Think about learning differences. Think about accessibility in a physical and intellectual way. Think about how they might use it, when or where they might use it. And think about your community demographics and potential changes that you see in immigrant groups and such. Are there trends in test scores or assessments that you need to support or address? The subject areas where the students most need support. And one question that we often overlook is, who are the non-users, the people we don't see, the people that might benefit from use of our collection that do not come into the library necessarily. In terms of curriculum, who are you addressing in terms of your subject areas? Are you focusing on the people who need you most, or maybe just the few teachers who show up the most? What collection additions are most suited to inquiry learning? Are there new initiatives coming down the road? Are there major projects that you need to know about that are going to take place? A new librarian may not be able to see that for the course of an entire year, perhaps a semester, but there are assignments that come around only once a year that might surprise you. What are the recreational needs and interests of your students? What are their personal needs? Should you have professional resources? Many of us had a physical professional collection. And those books for me, their expiration date kind of died pretty quickly, and I developed a digital collection as well as a digital collection of professional journals or made them accessible to the people who needed them on the faculty. You need to know about your collection. You're going to be doing some analysis for your strategic plan. You need to know about it physically, and you need to know about its age. You need to know you need to be aware of some of the tools for building a collection. These are some of the journals that you might be using as you make decisions. In addition, some informal tools, as well as the official ALA, ALSC, YALSA award winners, and I'm including in that best apps and best websites that you're going to be curating and including in your collection. There are tools like YALSA's Book Finder, which is now a database website, the database of award-winning children's literature, and of course Novelist and Novelist K8. And then there are the book bloggers that will inform some of your purchasing decisions. There are so many. This is just a handful. You may want to be aware of SLJ's annual average book prices for each year to help you make your plans and to see some trends, and also to budget perhaps. And these are just some measures by which you might evaluate your collection. You may want to do inventory. It used to be that people did inventory every year and closed their library for a week or two. I do not advocate that. It's easier to do in a digital time, and it's also easy to do strategically. You could have some library volunteers. My life skills students really loved doing inventory. Some of my parents loved doing inventory too. But sometimes I would just do the 600s or the fiction section. You don't necessarily need to do every part of your collection. So weeding is the job that most people least like to do in library settings, possibly also in your gardens. But if you're going to keep a garden that grows well, and if you're going to have a library that grows and is attractive, you absolutely need to weed. And so this is actually the statement from Will Manning. Next to emptying the outdoor backdrop on a cold and snowy day, weeding is the most undesirable job in the library. It is also one of the most important. Collections that go unweeded tend to be cluttered, unattractive, and unreliable information sources. And so there are some strategies for weeding. There are some guidelines. There are definitely some websites that will help, including the Texas State Library has an updated, they update on a fairly regular basis, their crew manual. And this is also a really handy toolkit for if you need to make the case for weeding. Here's some rationale. So this is a definite, if you don't read it cover to cover, at least make sure that as you go into practice, you're aware of the crew manual. Within the crew manual, you'll see this collection management tool called MUSTY. This is an acronym that is used an awful lot. I've seen it written within. I do love Jennifer Lagarde's other model. In addition to MUSTY, she has one called FRESH. And these are questions you might ask before you. Weeding is sometimes a tricky business. You may not want to have students help you weed. It becomes a public relations nightmare if people don't understand the weeding process. Similarly, you may not really want to throw books in a trash can. There are often procedures that are created by the district or by your individual school on how books can be de-accessioned. They are school district property. Sometimes, especially with the art books, I would offer them on a cart to the art department or let the history department have first pick before I de-accessioned. But you do want to check with your principal if you're not aware of the procedure to find out exactly the right way to do this. And often you will do this with the assistance of a custodian. For fun, as we end, this is a little video on weeding. I think that's enough of that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this rather long lecture on collection development. I will see you in our discussion threads in Canvas.